was left in LA. I actually was trapped in a hotel. It was about probably like 70 or so bloods in the hallway. I couldn't even leave my room. Actually, after Big got killed, they was probably looking for more bad boy artists.
Big just got killed. The guy who got you out there and everything jumps on the first plane smoking and leave you out there?
The night Biggie was killed was already chaotic. But what if you were told that there could have been another target and that it was allegedly Mase?
Not gonna be like the rest of the people around Puff that don't tell him he's wrong.
Rumors were swirling that Mase was tangled up in some heavy stuff involving Biggie, Tupac, and the whole bad boy situation. Word was he supposedly had some serious receipts that Diddy wasn't trying to let see the light of day.
You need more proof. Biggie ain't here, so Big can't give you no receipts. He dead.
When news broke that Biggie had been shot, Mase was allegedly stuck in a hotel, surrounded by about 70 Bloods. And since the Bloods and Bad Boy weren't exactly on good terms at the time, being in that hotel that night, yeah, that probably wasn't just a coincidence.
I was left in LA. I actually was trapped in a hotel.
Some say it was part of a much bigger plan, and of course, Diddy's name got dragged into it. But how did it all start? Let's take it back and break it down. Biggie had come a long way from his days hustling on the streets of Brooklyn.
You was stealing, or you was hustling, one of the two, or you was a nobody.
That was a ticket. Become a big drug dealer, make money, make a better life for yourself.
Born in 1972, he had turned his raw talent and larger-than-life personality into a career that made him one of the biggest names in hip-hop. But despite all the success, his time in Los Angeles felt different, heavy with tension. Just 6 months earlier, Tupac Shakur had been gunned down, and many feared Biggie might be next.
I'm knowing it can go down. So I'm telling him, I think I sent him, I spoke to him, go to the spy shop. We had a joint for the spy shop, so I was like, yo, go get a Fast Boy. You know what I'm saying?
In his final days, he was in LA promoting his second album, Life After Death. He was making the rounds, attending events, doing interviews, and trying to shake off the rumors that he had anything to do with Tupac's murder. He had denied it over and over, but the whispers wouldn't stop. The morning of March 8th, 1997, started with a cloud of unease hanging over Biggie. The night before, the crowd at the Soul Train Awards had made it clear he wasn't welcome in LA. The booze, the tension, the whispered warnings, it all weighed on him. That night, there was another big event on the schedule, a high-profile party hosted by Vibe magazine at the Peterson Automotive Museum. Biggie wasn't sure if he should go. The threats against him weren't just rumors anymore. They felt real.
The crowd was very unwelcoming. He was booed.
What's up, Callie?
Many people were very upset that Biggie was in their hometown on their turf.
But then Puffy called. Puffy, ever the businessman, believed Biggie needed to be there. He had to be seen, had to work the room, had to keep pushing Life After Death and prove he wasn't scared. Maybe it was about business, maybe it was about pride. Either way, Biggie agreed.
They wanted him to go out and start to become more interactive in the LA scene, get to be known more.
Biggie did have hesitations about going to the Vibe party, even though he was not a man to back down from a threat.
By 10:15 p.m., the party was in full swing. 3 hours before his life would be cut short, Biggie arrived, moving through the crowd with that signature mix of caution and confidence. He wasn't oblivious to the risk, but he also wasn't the type to back down. Was it a strategic move, a defiant stand, or just the blind faith of a man who thought he had more time? Whatever the case, that moment, his decision to stay in LA, to show up at that party, would change everything. As the night went on, the crowd inside the museum swelled. Industry big shots, hip-hop royalty, street figures, everyone was there. But as the clock neared midnight, the fire marshal called it too many people, too much chaos. The party was over. Getting out of there wasn't quick. It took Biggie and his crew over 30 minutes just to push through the crowd and get to their SUVs. By 12:15 a.m., his vehicle finally pulled away, security close behind. They were heading back to the hotel, trying to move carefully. But LA's streets had a different plan. At the intersection of Wilshire Boulevard and South Fairfax Avenue, a dark Chevy Impala rolled up alongside them. No warning, no words, just gunfire.
As Biggie's vehicle pulled out, it was being driven by one of the bodyguards.
4 bullets hit Biggie, each one finding a vital spot. The SUV sped off towards Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, but it was already too late. At 1:15 a.m., Christopher Wallace was pronounced dead.
The gangster rap world has been shaken again, this time by the violent death of the performer known as Notorious B.I.G.
The rapper was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. He was pronounced dead a short time later.
The news sent shockwaves through the hip-hop world. Another legend lost. Another young black man gunned down. The eerie similarities to Tupac's murder just 6 months earlier were impossible to ignore. Both shot at intersections, both ambushed in their cars, both victims of a feud that had spiraled into something deadly. When the autopsy report came back, it revealed key details about the attack. Biggie had been shot with 4 medium-caliber bullets, all full metal jacket rounds. Unlike the hollow point bullets used by professionals and law enforcement, designed to expand on impact for maximum damage, full metal jackets are more common for target practice or amateur shooters.
Based on the trajectories, that these shots were not well aimed. They didn't strike vital areas such as the head or the chest, and they were sprayed throughout the vehicle. To me, this looks like the work of an amateur. From the autopsy report, I can see that Biggie was shot by 4 medium caliber bullets, full metal jackets. This is significant because it can tell us something about the shooter.
That raised a question. Was this a calculated hit by a trained assassin or the work of someone less experienced, maybe tied to the gang world? Then came an even bigger clue. The bullets. The ones recovered from Biggie's body were from a German brand called Gecko ammo, often linked to LA gang activity, especially within the Bloods and the Crips, with Death Row Records rumored to have ties to the Bloods and Bad Boy Records allegedly connected to the Crips. The rivalry had already been dangerous. Now it seemed like it had turned deadly. At the vibe party that night, there were whispers that gang members were in the mix, moving through the crowd, rubbing shoulders with the Bad Boy crew. Some even claimed Puffy had hired Crip-affiliated security while in LA, a move that, if true, would have been seen as a straight-up insult to Death Row's blood ties. If the industry beef had been simmering before, that night it boiled over into something real, something deadly. And then Biggie was gone. That same night, Mase was locked up in a hotel room when the news hit. He had been with a young woman when he heard, and at first it didn't seem real. Just shock, disbelief, and the creeping feeling that everything was about to go left. But before he could even wrap his head around what had happened, he realized he had a problem of his own. He was trapped. The hallways outside were packed, about 70 Bloods roaming around. The tension so thick it felt like one wrong step would set the whole place off.
I was left in LA. I actually was trapped in a hotel.
Now I want to ask a question. What do you mean trapped?
It was about probably like 70.
He couldn't leave, couldn't even peek out the door without the risk of running into something he wasn't ready for. And the worst part, nobody was looking for him. Not Diddy, not the Bad Boy crew, nobody. It was every man for himself. And then the rumors started swirling. People were saying Diddy might have been involved somehow, allegedly setting up the whole thing to take Mase out of the picture. Eventually, Gene Deal, a former Bad Boy security, came to get him out.
And then early that morning, when Puff had got on a plane and left Mase, we went and got him and let him meet some dudes from Black Hands. We went and got Mase. Mase came down.
But even after making it out of that hotel, Mase was still stranded in LA, left behind by the very people he had rolled in with. That moment stuck with him. It was a lesson, a brutal, eye-opening reminder that when things go bad, loyalty can vanish just like that. He made his way to Vegas before finally heading back east, where he eventually reunited with the rest of the crew. But that night, it never left him. It changed the way he looked at the game, the industry, and the people around him. The way he saw it, when the streets get hot, it's every man for himself. And from that moment on, he never forgot it. Years later, Mase would take to social media to call Diddy out, claiming he had receipts that could change everything. It sounded like a warning, like he knew things that could flip the whole story upside down. He even hinted that bad boy artists like Craig Mack and Biggie might have gotten caught up in something too deep, something that kept them from ever telling the truth. And now, Mase claimed he had all the facts, all the dirty secrets that Bad Boy didn't want out.
You need more proof. Biggie ain't here, so Big can't give you no receipts. He dead. Craig Mack can't give you receipts. He dead.
At this point, Biggie's murder wasn't just about hip-hop. It was about power, loyalty, and a feud that had spiraled way past music. His history with Tupac only made it worse. The tension between them had started long before, back in 1994, when Tupac was shot and robbed at a New York studio. He was convinced Biggie and Puffy had set him up, and that betrayal, real or imagined, became the match that lit the fire. Now, when Tupac was killed in Las Vegas in September 1996, the whispers started immediately. Was Biggie involved? Was this street justice? Revenge? Some believed that what happened to Biggie that night in LA was a direct response, a final, brutal chapter in a story that had gone too far. But even decades later, the truth remains buried in rumors, theories, and unanswered questions. Not long after Biggie's death, the conspiracy theories started flying. Some people believed law enforcement had a hand in it, while others pointed to deeper industry politics, suggesting that the powers that be weren't ready to let Biggie, or Tupac, rise beyond music.
There are multiple conspiracy theories that surrounded the deaths of both Biggie and Tupac, and one of the ones that's continued to persist was that the FBI was involved.
Even Lil' Kim, someone who knew Biggie better than most, felt like there had to be something bigger at play.
I always felt like Biggie and Tupac's death was bigger than how they tried to make it to be.
Despite endless investigations, rumors, and a long list of suspects, Biggie's murder is still unsolved. And because it's forever tangled up with Tupac's death, the mystery keeps growing, making it one of hip-hop's darkest and most debated tragedies. The drama between Biggie and Tupac didn't start with just diss tracks. It had real consequences. After surviving a robbery and shooting in New York in 1994, Tupac became convinced Biggie and Puffy had set him up. That betrayal, real or imagined, was the beginning of the East Coast versus West Coast War. And when Tupac later signed with Suge Knight's Death Row Records, the divide became personal and business all at once. The feud played out in music, with Biggie dropping Who Shot Ya, a track that many saw as a direct taunt at Tupac.
Who shot ya? Separate the weak from the ops. Leap hard to creep them Brooklyn streets.
Tupac fired back with Hit 'Em Up, where he claimed to have slept with Biggie's wife, Faith Evans.
West Side, bad boy killers.
What started as rap beef turned into real-world violence, and the tension only got worse. Then came Tupac's murder in Las Vegas, and just like that, the rumors started flying. Almost immediately, people were pointing fingers at Biggie and Puffy, convinced they had something to do with it. One wild theory even claimed that Biggie had supplied the gun used in the shooting, an idea that only fueled the East Coast versus West Coast fire. Given both parties' alleged connections to the Crips and Bloods, it didn't take much for people to believe it's gang retaliation. But when investigators started digging into Biggie's murder, they found something that didn't quite add up. His death didn't look like the work of a professional hitman. Then, months after Biggie was killed, something unexpected surfaced. In November 1997, LAPD officer David Mack was arrested for robbing a bank, and when police searched his home, they found a stash of Gecko brand bullets, the exact same kind used to kill Biggie. That alone was suspicious, but it didn't stop there. Mack also drove a dark-colored Chevy Impala, just like the one seen speeding away from the Emder scene. And to top it all off, he had connections to the Bloods and was rumored to be doing security work for Death Row Records.
According to the police report, when the detectives searched Mack's residence, they found a cache of Gecko-type bullets. These are not bullets that are used by the LAPD, same type of bullet that was used in the shooting of Biggie. Now, Mack also drives a dark-colored Chevy Impala, very similar to the vehicle described during the shooting incident.
That's when a new theory started to take shape. Was there a connection between corrupt cops and Death Row? It was no secret that off-duty officers were often hired as security for big-name artists, but some of these cops weren't exactly the clean-cut lawmen they were supposed to be. In 2002, Biggie's family took legal action, suing the LAPD and claiming that rogue officers were involved in a cover-up. The case forced the department to reopen the investigation, but eventually they ruled there wasn't enough solid evidence to tie Mack to the murder. The family later dropped the case, but just like everything else surrounding Biggie's death, the rumors never really died. Then, in 2009, a new witness came forward, a woman who claimed she had been involved in setting up Biggie's murder. She pointed the finger at a Bloods member named Wardle Poochie Faust and dropped a bombshell. The hit was allegedly ordered by none other than Suge Knight, who was already sitting in prison at the time. According to her, she had visited Suge behind bars, where he gave her the order to hire Faust, promising an undisclosed payout.
And in it, she describes how she helped coordinate the murder of Biggie, and she goes on to name a member of the Bloods as the killer.
We were able to identify the shooter, a guy named Wardell Faust. They called him Poochie.
If that was true, then the biggest question remained: why? Why would Suge go out of his way to have Biggie killed? Sure, the East Coast versus West Coast war had been nasty, but was it really bad enough to justify an execution? To understand the motive, you have to rewind 6 months before Biggie's murder, to the night Tupac was gunned down. It was September 7th, 1996, and after watching Mike Tyson knock out Bruce Seldon in Las Vegas, Tupac found himself in the middle of a brawl at the MGM Grand. The fight was caught on camera. Tupac, Suge Knight, and their crew were seen jumping a Southside Crip named Orlando Anderson.
Tupac Shakur encountered a Southside Crip gang member, a guy named Orlando Anderson, and started a fist fight with him.
That same night, Tupac was shot in a drive-by, and all eyes turned to Anderson. Then came the rumor that Biggie had supplied the weapon that killed Tupac. There was never any real proof, but Suge Knight supposedly believed it. And in the world of street politics, if you think someone played a role in taking out your guy, you don't let the cops handle it. You settle the score yourself. If Suge really did put a hit out on Biggie, then his murder might not have been about music at all. It might have been about gang loyalty, power, and revenge. But despite all the speculation, the named suspect, and the countless theories, Biggie's case was never officially solved. Wardell Poochie Faust was shot and killed in a separate gang-related attack in 2003, 6 years before his name was even publicly linked to the crime. And with no hard evidence beyond a single witness statement from 2009, authorities never had enough to make an arrest. As the years passed, key witnesses either disappeared, refused to talk, or ended up victims of the streets themselves. Biggie's case became another cold file, another mystery lost in the chaos of hip-hop's most violent era. As for Suge Knight, he ended up in prison in 2015 for an entirely different crime. But to this day, he's never admitted to having anything to do with Biggie's death. Whether he ordered the hit or not, one thing remains certain: the killing of the notorious Big was more than just another tragedy in rap. It was the final nail in the coffin of an era, a brutal reminder that in the world of power, money, and street politics, no one is untouchable. The details of the autopsy only deepened the mystery. Even Lil Cease, who was right there that night, initially thought Biggie would pull through. No one realized just how bad the damage really was.
Just looking like with a shock face, like in shock. But I seen a bunch of people get shot, and they live. So that was the first thing in my mind. Oh, he gonna be all right. Oh, he ain't get shot in his head. He ain't get shot in his chest. All right, Big. Oh, Big gonna be cool. He good.
Biggie was hit 4 times. The first shot hit his wrist, the second his thigh, both non-life-threatening. The third passed through his back and exited his shoulder, barely grazing him. But the fourth bullet was different. It entered just above his right hip, ripped through his abdomen, tore through his colon and liver, punctured his diaphragm, and ultimately pierced his heart. That was the one, the fatal one. And here's the tragic part. Because of his size, his wounds sealed around the bullets, meaning there wasn't much external bleeding. Paramedics didn't realize how serious it was. They tried everything, even cracking open his chest to shock his heart back to life. But by then, it was too late. Christopher Wallace was gone. What's chilling is that it all came down to inches. If that fourth bullet had landed just a little differently, an inch to the left or right, he might have survived. But fate had other plans. And just 9 days later, Brooklyn stood still as thousands flooded the streets to say goodbye to their hometown hero. Biggie was only 24. He hadn't even lived a full quarter of a century, yet he had already changed the game forever. 2 weeks after his death, Life After Death dropped, an album that would become one of the best-selling hip-hop records of all time. The title alone was haunting, almost as if Biggie knew his legend would outlive him. His murder wasn't just another moment in the East Coast-West Coast war, it was something deeper. It was a reminder of how easily the cycle of violence can steal even the brightest stars. He had made it out of the struggle only to be dragged back in. And for what? Biggie wasn't just a rapper. He was a storyteller, a poet, a voice for the streets. He took the pain, the hustle, and the dreams of Brooklyn and turned them into art. His flow was unmatched, his charisma undeniable, his presence unforgettable. To the world, he was a legend. To Brooklyn, he was a king. The smoothest, the sharpest, the realest to ever do it. And even though his life was cut short, his music, his influence, and his words, they'll never fade.